It is one of the most misunderstood Ferraris. The Ferrari 348 TS is a vehicle that is shrouded in mystery and controversy over its exterior looks as well as performance, which many would go to the extent of describing it as a vehicle with mediocre performance by the standards of a prancing horse. However, best of all, it is Italian. Italians make a lot of great things. These include pizza, with lovely red jalapenos sticking on top. The jalapeno is nice, juicy and red in color. However, its taste is to the contrary, as it is very hot and stingy unless you are trained for the taste. Thus is the best way to describe the Enzo era Ferraris. Is red masterpieces just like the jalapeno, however with performance that needs a trained professional driver and is unforgiving to anyone who is not used to them. Introduced in 1989 as a replacement to the very boxy looking Ferrari 328 of the early 80s and later in 1995 replaced by the Ferrari F355 with a more curved, aerodynamic-looking silhouette. Being designed in the middle of an aerodynamic transition did not give the Ferrari 348 the edge. Mostly, the 308 and the 328 were praised for their gorgeous-looking, boxy nature, whilst the much later, more aerodynamic versions like the Ferrari F355 that replaced its 348 and in particular the F360 had much better aerodynamic looks appreciated by the masses. The Ferrari 348 design was largely influenced by the design of the much larger Ferrari Testarossa, which had a flat 12 engine. The black rear light grille cover on the 348 was also borrowed from the Ferrari Testarossa's rear, showing the extent to which the Testarossa had influence over the design of the Ferrari TS. The rear lighting was also squared off instead of being circular like the previous generations. Having a close resemblance to the Ferrari Testarossa came with its own practicality consequences. The rear lighting grille cover had a blacked out theme, which is cool for visual aesthetics. However, practically, it actually blocked some of the light, meaning it could never be as bright as it could be. The generation that preceded it brought back the round headlights, starting with the Ferrari F355. Ferrari had not just refined the aerodynamics on this car. The refinement went as far as getting rid of the old space frame constructions of the previous cars like the 308 and replacing it with a much lighter and torsionally stiffer monocoque construction. Its designation 348 in Ferrari nomenclature represents 3.4-liter V8 engine. The displacement comes first, followed by the number of cylinders, a tradition that has been going on since the days of the Dino. The engine was also mounted 5 inches lower in the chassis than the Ferrari 308, which meant it had a much lower center of gravity for better handling, and it was also mounted longitudinally. The design of the 348 was done by a gentleman at Pininfarina called Leonardo Fioravanti, who was the same guy responsible for the 348, the F40, 288 GTO, and 512 BB and many others. The Ferrari 348 came in 3 body styles. Firstly, as the TB or Trasversale Berlinetta, which was a hardtop version, then TS Trasversale Spider, which was a hardtop Targa convertible, then the Spider, which was a fully convertible version of it. Trasversale was the designation for the fact that the gearbox was transversely mounted on the vehicle. On the front side of things, the Ferrari 348 lacked the gorgeous aesthetic of its predecessor, the Ferrari 328. Ferrari also added a fake grille which they expected to look cool, although things didn't turn that way much. Pop-up headlights were a common couch of the 1980s and all Ferraris had them, from the 430. However, on Ferrari they were best implemented by the 308, which seemed to have better execution than what the 428 did. So, by now it starts to paint the picture that a Ferrari had cultivated majority of the design that went onto the 428 from the 328. It might have looked better and have less controversy on its exterior. However, most of it being borrowed from the Ferrari Testarossa. The vehicle had mixed design opinions. On one hand, it's trying to be a successor to a very successful V8 design, and the other is trying to be a smaller version of a V12 car that had a completely new design philosophy, caused a conflict in the ultimate design of the Ferrari 348. Amongst the borrowed ideas, the one that stood out to be most interesting of all of them, the side skirts that were borrowed from the Ferrari Testarossa. You may be forgiven for thinking the large streaks on the sides of the Ferrari 348 have any aerodynamic functions that were borrowed from the Testarossa. However, this is not the case, but it's also not the case to say they didn't have any function at all. They were not just purely for aesthetic reasons. The Ferrari Testarossa's 4.9-liter flat-12 engine required a massive amount of airflow to be cooled, with the two angled radiators which had two large gaping holes for cooling. Now in several markets these were outlawed, so Ferrari's solution was to convert the large apertures into collections of much smaller ones by dressing the holes with long, flowing streaks that extended into the doors, tapering off to the point just shy of the front shut lines. The visually cool-looking nature of the side streaks were well received by the public, and they made their way onto the Ferrari 428, which was the current production V8 mid-engine sports car during the time of the Testarossa. They were so received by Ferrari as well that Ferrari extended the design aperture of these streaks right directly onto the rear lighting, and hence the black tinted covers that we saw on the 328 and the Testarossa. The Ferrari 348 utilized two 15-section Pirelli P0 tires on 17-inch wheels, which were slightly larger than the 16-inch which you got on the Ferrari 308 and the 328. However, both designs had 5-spoke rims that looked silver in color. The attention to detail went as far as putting the Ferrari logo on the wheel valves. The 328 interior incorporated some tech features of its predecessor, which made it a bit outstanding. However, in terms of styling, the Ferrari 308 and 328 were more stylish to the interior. The Ferrari 328 TS was more visually striking compared to its cousin, the Ferrari 328 TB, thanks to its tugger top which is painted black. The red mesh grille cover over the mid-engine of the Ferrari 328 had more function over form in contrast to modern-day supercars. The Ferrari 328 was powered by a 3.8-liter V8 engine that produced up to 316 horsepower and 324 Nm at 5,000 revs per minute. The V8 engine in the Ferrari 348 was the final to be produced during the leadership of Enzo Ferrari. After Enzo Ferrari's death, there is a sentiment that surrounded Ferraris, that they became more soft and sublime vehicles instead of their racing nature of the 60s and 70s. However, ironically, Enzo Ferrari would have preferred it that way, as his daily driver was a Ferrari 330 GTC, which was a comfortable V12 Grand Tourer. Enzo Ferrari had a deep appreciation for the V12 engine, which is why when the Dino first came out with its V6 engine, Enzo refused to put the Ferrari badge on it and just called it the Dino. The Dino became the predecessor to the Ferrari 308, which was the V8 versions of the mid-engine sports cars, which later evolved into the Ferrari 328. With its refined, aerodynamic-looking body and sophisticated chassis, things got even more interesting from the interior. But first, to get in, the handle is underneath the door and a little button to push before it opens. The interior is pure 1980s, bare by modern standards, however sophisticated from the era in which it was developed. There's a few buttons on the door handle for the controls of the windows. Electric windows were a luxury feature only found on the most expensive vehicles in the 1980s. Continuing on the theme of the 80s are a few analog gauges located behind the steering wheel. The fuel and the oil temperature gauge are located on the center console, just below the switches for lighting and the air conditioning system. The air conditioning was a luxury necessity which the previous generation didn't have. Overall, the interior was immaculately covered in nice leather, showing that this was a high-end vehicle, except around the squared-off air vents. Basic by modern standards, the interior had a nice 3-spoke steering wheel with the Prancing Horse logo in the center, reminding us of the days when vehicle didn't have buttons on the steering wheel. For me, the 308 interior still looked more sporty. My biggest joy for the interior is the classic, quintessential Ferrari gated manual transmission that sits right in the center. The Ferrari 348 came with a 5-speed manual transmission with the reverse, right where most vehicles would have the first gear. The gearbox made a clicking sound for every change. Next to the gated transmission are another few buttons for controls of the windows. The center console of the Ferrari 348 was not as ergonomic as that of the previous 328, which also had an interesting style of switches which had more attention to detail. Behind the steering wheel is the classic-looking old gauge instrument cluster with the tachometer and the speedometer next to each other with red instrument indication. The Ferrari 348 is a very basic key fob in red with the Ferrari logo in the middle. Looking at it from the overhead, there's a nice contrast of stitching, which is grey in color over the roof, and very dark themed sun visors that are very black in color. There was also a Ferrari owner's manual behind the passenger seat, although I was a bit shy to open it. Overall speaking, the interior is very minimalistic by modern standards. However, for the period in which it was built, it is very highly modest. It is from a period when cars were all about the driving experience rather than all the luxury and amenities that we're used to. So what a car it is.
How's it? Nice car. This car you got,
The Ferrari 348 could do 0 to 100 in 5.6 seconds and reach a top speed of 275 kilometers an hour. By today's standards, that's the performance of an average vehicle or a hot hatch. However, in the terms of the 1980s, that was a performance tier at its top. It is interesting how modern performance cars have recalibrated our thoughts of performance and speed to such levels we've never seen before. However, it is always good to remember where it all started in some of the earlier vehicles that had performance which we take for granted by today's standards. Cars like the Ferrari 348 TS. Thank you for watching.